Cet homme, Jeff Nichols, n'a pas seulement l'étoffe des grands cinéastes, il est l'héritier direct de légendes comme John Ford. Tous les deux ont la même passion, celle des honnêtes gens qui ne cherchent pas la richesse, mais seulement un endroit pour être. Deux réalisateurs chez qui il faut lutter pour vivre, car l'American Dream n'existe pas. Pour son 5e film Loving, Jeff Nichols approfondit cette peinture rurale où il est question de quête initiatique. Et pour explorer son univers, plongez-vous dans cette revue qui s'approche au mieux de cet impossible, la fabrication des films. Le cinéma, c'est avant tout un art visuel. Pour chaque film, il y a une manière de filmer. Elle est faite de quoi, votre mise en scène pour Loving?
So Loving was, in my opinion, the most precise film I've directed to date. Partly because of experience, but also because of money and time. I was given both. If you look at the trajectory of the films, just from a directing standpoint, you have shotgun stories, which is very still. The camera's always locked off. It's a very wide shot. Maybe you have a 2-shot, but it never moves. That was mostly pragmatic because we had no money. I didn't even have a dolly. We couldn't move the camera. But I applied some kind of reverse engineered logic to that, which is the characters in that story, they were not upwardly mobile. They weren't trying to make their lives better necessarily. And they were just stuck. They were stagnant. They were stuck in place. And that film, it feels kind of like that. It's almost oppressive in how still it is.
Is anyone seeing this?
When we started to make Take Shelter, I wanted to move the camera more, but very simply.
Are you okay?
I was watching The Shining, and you see these scenes of Jack Nicholson typing, and the camera's behind him, and it just pushes in like this. And now I was always taught that if the camera moves, there's a point of view attached to it. And I'm thinking, well, whose point of view is that? That's not Jack Nicholson's point of view. He's typing. So who are we with? And it's Kubrick, so I know he's thinking about it. And then you say, oh, that's the ghost. That's the spirit of this hotel. It is working on him. It is entering his brain. And that's what this movement is. And I thought, okay, well, I need to steal that. And then thinking about Take Shelter, you have a man who, the big question is, are these forces in his mind or outside? But regardless, they are these forces outside of the edges of the frame. And so every shot in that movie is this. To the point where even some shots we shot static, and I did a digital zoom just to give you, like 2%, just to always give you this sense that the world is kind of closing in on this man. But it was a very specific type of movement. Not fluid at all. When we got to Mud I knew needed to have this life to it. It needed to flow like this river. And so that was all Steadicam work. I'd never worked with a Steadicam before. And those of you that know the technicalities of a Steadicam, it's on a gyroscopic arm, and it has this float to it. Even when it tries to stay still, it floats. And that felt very much like being a child. It felt very much like being on a river. And so we're moving with these kids, and I wanted that thing constantly moving. I wanted that camera moving with those kids all the time. If you look at Midnight Special, I started to employ all those techniques of movement. You get a little bit of Steadicam, you get a little bit of dolly work, a little bit of handheld work. I'm still not a huge fan of handheld work. But Midnight Special was really about conquering light, a different type of technique, shooting film and lighting for film. But when you get to Loving is a very classic style of directing. I knew I wanted movement, but much like Shotgun Stories, I knew these people were trapped. These people are in prison, even when they're not specifically in jail. That's what the Jim Crow South does. It constantly puts you in a place where you're trapped. And so I wanted that camera locked off. I didn't want that drift that comes with Steadicam. I wanted this locked off camera, but I still wanted movement. So I was studying No Country for Old Men, which is one of my favorite films, and I study it every time I go out to make a movie. I just love the way it's lit. I love the way the camera moves. I love the specific choices. And I found a behind-the-scenes photograph of a scene, and they had a dolly set up, And then they had a jib arm, which is an arm that reaches out with a remote head on it. And I said, oh, that's how they're getting these complex movements without that drift. I said, well, that's what we need. And that's why I say that there's a precision to that directing. Every movement in Loving is a decision.
I want to put the kitchen right back here.
Richard, stop this. I don't know what you're saying.
I bought it.
If you look at Mildred's character out in the field where he proposes to her, she's standing in this field, she sees this field every day, it means nothing to her, and then he explains that he bought it for her. This is her field, this is their field, this is their home. The camera starts to move in as she's processing this. The way I reasoned it out is it is motivated by some interior dialogue that's happening in her mind. Her whole world is changing. So our perspective just changes slightly. That is happening in a very specific moment in the scene, and everyone has to be orchestrated. So that's kind of what I mean by precision.
Nailed it.
Yes?
Would you marry me?
Il y a une notion que vous développez et qu'on peut voir dans cet extrait, c'est la notion de frontière. La notion de frontière, elle est définie d'abord par votre mise en scène, les cadres, ce que vous tenez hors champ ou ce que vous décidez de nous montrer. La frontière géographique des personnages, est-ce qu'ils décident de se déplacer ou pas dans cette géographie? Est-ce que Jeff Nichols, vous n'êtes pas en fin de compte un réalisateur de la frontière?
In the most pragmatic answer, I love horizon lines, you know, and that's what built Westerns, I think. Just looking out toward that Western horizon and saying, manifest destiny. This is what the Western was about the human pursuit of something out there, something possibly better. The interesting thing is, I'm not making Westerns. I'm making things in the South, but I've always been struck by that horizon line, because that's what exists in southeastern Arkansas. When you get into this flat Delta farmland, it's a different type of horizon than that Western horizon. But I think what I'm really looking at is this very human landscape. I'm a writer first and a director second. And the whole reason for writing any of this stuff is to transmit a feeling to people. The beautiful part about being both the writer and the director is that I get to imagine a visual sense of that feeling.
I know we have some enemies, but we have some friends too.
You think you'll lose?
We may lose the small battles, but win the big war.
Is there anything you'd like me to say to the Supreme Court Justices of the United States?
Yeah. Tell the judge I love my wife.
Jeff Nichols, pourquoi filmez-vous?
I think I make movies to figure out how I feel about the world. There's a great Flannery O'Connor quote that I'll butcher, that she says, I didn't know what I felt about something until I wrote it down. And I get that sense a lot. Ultimately, I want to transfer an emotion that I feel to the audience. But what I'm finding, the more that I do this and the older that I get, I'm 38 today, I find that I'm finding out much more about myself as I do this.